The auctioneer's voice cut through the humid Atlantic City air like a blade through fog. Going once. Going twice. His gavel hovered above the podium, hesitating, as if even he couldn't believe what was about to happen. $900. Sarah Mitchell's voice cracked as she raised her hand, her palms slick with nervous sweat. Around her, the handful of locals who'd bothered to show up for the municipal auction turned to stare. A few snickered. Most just shook their heads. The gavel came down with a hollow thud that seemed to echo through Sarah's chest. Sold. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. To the young lady in the back, Sarah's legs felt like water as she made her way to the clerk's table. Behind her, she heard the whispers start immediately. That's Marcus Thompson's widow, isn't it? Poor thing. Desperation makes people do crazy things. She just bought a death trap for the price of a used refrigerator. Sarah's hands trembled as she signed the paperwork, her 7-year-old daughter Lily pressed against her side. The girl's small fingers clutched her mother's worn jacket, her eyes wide as she took in the building that was now theirs. The Atlantic Paradise Casino had been condemned for 3 years. What had once been a gleaming monument to 1,980 seconds excess now looked like something from a post-apocalyptic movie. The Art Deco facade, once covered in thousands of lights, was mostly bare concrete, streaked with rust and grime. Windows were either boarded up or shattered entirely. The massive neon sign that had once spelled out Atlantic Paradise in flowing script now hung at a dangerous angle, with only Tick-Pa still attached to the building. "Mummy," Lily whispered. "It looks scary." Sarah knelt down, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "It looks like an adventure, baby. Like a castle that needs saving." But inside, Sarah's mind was screaming. What had she done? She had exactly $127 left in her bank account. Rent was due in 12 days on their studio apartment in Newark. Her boss at the diner had just cut her hours. Again. And she'd just spent $900, nearly a quarter of her remaining savings after Marcus's medical bills, on a building that the city wanted demolished. But the alternative had been worse. The eviction notice. The collection calls. Lily's asthma medication that insurance wouldn't cover. The look in her daughter's eyes when Sarah had to explain why they couldn't afford the school field trip, the new shoes, the birthday party. The casino had been listed as salvage only. Buyer assumes all liability. The minimum bid was $500. Sarah had done the math. If she could just salvage the copper wiring, maybe some of the fixtures, she could potentially clear a few $1,000s, enough to buy them a month, maybe 2. Now, standing in the parking lot with the deed clutched in her hand, that plan seemed insane. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up beside them, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. He was in his 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that came from tropical vacations rather than construction work. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Mrs. Mitchell?" He extended his hand. "Vincent Castellano. I represent the Boardwalk Development Corporation." Sarah didn't take his hand. Something about the way he'd appeared the moment the auction ended made her instinctively wary. "I wanted to make you an offer before you get too attached to your purchase." Castellano continued smoothly. $5,000. Cash. Today. You walk away with a profit. No hassle, no liability. I'd call that a smart business decision for a woman in your situation. The emphasis on the last word made Sarah's jaw tighten. "And what exactly is my situation, Mr. Castellano?" "Well, I just meant," he spread his hands in mock sympathy, "single mother, limited resources, a building that'll cost 10 times what you paid just to make it safe enough to demolish. I'm trying to save you from making a very expensive mistake. The building's not for sale." Castellano's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "That's unfortunate. The Paradise has been a blight on this neighborhood for years. The city is very motivated to see it removed. I'm sure the inspection department will be thorough in their assessment of the property. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you a lifeline, Mrs. Mitchell. But the offer expires the moment I drive away. He pulled out a business card and held it out. When Sarah didn't take it, he placed it on the hood of her beat-up Honda Civic. Think about your daughter. As his Mercedes glided away, Lily tugged on Sarah's sleeve. Mummy, why was that man mean? Some people think they can scare you into doing what they want, baby. Sarah picked up the business card and tore it in half. But we don't scare easy, do we? Lily shook her head solemnly, and Sarah felt a fierce surge of determination. She'd bought this disaster of a building. Now, she had to make it work. The front entrance was chained, shut with multiple padlocks, each one marked with city seals and warnings about structural instability. But Sarah had noticed during her research that the service entrance on the west side had a door hanging off its hinges. She'd brought bolt cutters just in case, but they weren't necessary. Stay close to me, Sarah instructed Lily as they squeezed through the gap. Don't touch anything unless I say it's okay. Inside was worse than she'd imagined. The main gaming floor had been gutted, all the slot machines and table games were long gone. What remained was a vast, dark space filled with debris. Ceiling tiles had collapsed, creating mountains of soggy acoustic panels and twisted metal framing. Graffiti covered every accessible wall. The carpet, once probably a garish pattern of golds and reds, was now black with mold and rainwater. The smell hit them like a physical force: mildew, decay, and something else, something chemical and wrong. Lily pressed her face into Sarah's side, and Sarah could feel her daughter's small body trembling. She pulled out the heavy-duty flashlight she'd bought at the hardware store, one of her last responsible purchases before committing financial suicide. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing more devastation. But as they moved deeper into the casino, Sarah's trained eye, honed by 3 years of working construction with Marcus before he got sick, started seeing possibilities beneath the destruction. The main support columns were concrete, not wood, still solid. The floor joists, visible through the damaged carpet, looked intact. The Art Deco details around the perimeter, the curved brass railings, the geometric light fixtures were tarnished, but salvageable. Look, Lily. Sarah pointed her flashlight at a section of wall where the plaster had fallen away, revealing the original brick underneath. See that? That's real brick, not cheap construction. They built things to last back then. It's still scary, Lily whispered. I know, baby. But sometimes, scary things are just things that need help. Like when you're scared at night, and I turn on the light, and you see it's just shadows. They made their way across the gaming floor toward the back offices. Sarah had seen enough casino layouts. While Marcus was alive, he'd worked on renovations for 3 Atlantic City casinos before his diagnosis. She knew where the really valuable salvage would be: the vault. Every casino had a secure room for cash counting and storage. Even one that had been closed for years might still have copper, security equipment, maybe even some abandoned safe deposit boxes with contents that could be claimed. The corridor to the back offices was narrower, darker. Sarah's flashlight beam picked out scattered papers, overturned filing cabinets, the remains of someone's makeshift sleeping area. Homeless people had clearly been using the building until the city had sealed it more thoroughly. Then, she saw it. At the end of the corridor, a massive steel door stood slightly ajar. It had to be 10 inches thick, with a combination lock mechanism the size of a dinner plate and a wheel handle that looked like it belonged on a submarine. The brass nameplate, tarnished but still legible, read, "Atlantic Paradise Gaming Authority Vault. Authorized personnel. Only." Sarah's heart hammered. The door was open. Why was it open? "Stay here," she told Lily, positioning her daughter by the wall near the corridor entrance. "Don't move. I'm going to check something, and then we're leaving. Okay?" Lily nodded. clutching her backpack like a shield. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Sarah approached the vault door slowly, listening for any sound that might indicate someone else was inside. But there was only silence and the distant drip of water. She put her shoulder against the steel and pushed. The door swung inward with surprising ease, well balanced despite its massive weight. Inside was darkness absolute. Sarah's flashlight beam penetrated the void, and what she saw made her breath catch. The vault was bigger than she'd expected, at least 20 feet square, with floor-to-ceiling shelving along 3 walls. But unlike the devastation in the rest of the casino, this room looked preserved. Metal shelves held what appeared to be ledgers and file boxes, all neatly organized. A desk sat in the center of the room, its surface empty except for a thin layer of dust. And along the back wall, she saw what she'd been hoping for. A row of what looked like old-fashioned safe deposit boxes built into the wall itself. But what caught her attention, what made her step fully into the vault, despite every instinct screaming at her to leave, was what sat on the middle shelf at eye level. Money, stacks and stacks of it, all wrapped in clear plastic. Sarah moved closer, her flashlight shaking in her hand. The bills were old, she could see that immediately. Not ancient, but definitely not current. The plastic wrapping had yellowed with age, and some of the bands holding the stacks together had deteriorated. She picked up one bundle with trembling hands. The bills were hundreds. Old design, from the late 1982. Each stack was labeled with a piece of masking tape. Handwritten, Gaming Authority Reserve, $100,000. Sarah counted the stacks. 5 on the first shelf. She moved to the second shelf. 10 more. Third shelf. Another 8. Her mind refused to do the math. It was too impossible. Too insane. She was holding what had to be over $2 million in a supposedly abandoned, condemned casino that she'd bought for $900. "Mommy?" Lily's scared voice echoed from the corridor. "Mommy, I hear something." Sarah's hands froze. She heard it too. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Voices. "Told you I saw someone go in." Light was moving around in there. Buildings supposed to be sealed. Probably just homeless. Or scrappers. "We need to check the vault before Sarah's paralysis broke." She grabbed 3 of the plastic-wrapped bundles, $300,000 if the labels were accurate, and stuffed them into her backpack. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the flashlight. She forced herself to move slowly, quietly out of the vault, pulling the heavy door until it was just slightly ajar like she'd found it. Then she grabbed Lily's hand and moved as quickly as she dared back through the debris-filled gaming floor. The voices were getting louder, echoing through the building's hollow spaces. Flashlight beams appeared near the service entrance they'd used. "This way," Sarah whispered, spotting a darkened doorway marked, "Emergency Exit. Alarm will sound." She prayed the alarm system was as dead as everything else in the building. The door opened silently. No alarm. They found themselves in a concrete stairwell that smelled like urine and old cigarette smoke. "Up or down?" Lily whispered. Sarah listened. The voices were coming from ground level, spreading out through the well. "Casino. Up." They climbed 3 flights in darkness, Sarah's flashlight off to avoid detection. The door at the top opened onto the casino's old hotel level. This section had been closed even longer than the gaming floor. The Paradise's hotel operations had ceased in the mid-1992, a decade before the casino itself shut down. The corridor they entered was like a time capsule. Faded wallpaper still clung to the walls in places. Room numbers hung askew on doors. Garbage and debris were minimal up here. Few people had bothered exploring the upper floors. Sarah found a room halfway down the corridor, with a door that still closed properly. She guided Lily inside, then pulled out her phone. No signal. Too deep in the building. They waited in the darkness. Sarah's heart pounding so loud she was sure it would give them away. The voices below continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, they faded. Sarah waited another 30 minutes before they ventured out, moving carefully back to the stairwell and down to ground level. The intruders were gone. They made it to the Honda without incident. Only when they were 5 blocks away, stopped at a red light, did Sarah finally exhale. Lily twisted in her seat to look at her mother. "Mommy, what was in those packages you took?" Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Something that might save us, baby. Or something that might destroy us. I honestly don't know which yet." That night, after Lily was asleep in their tiny studio apartment, Sarah spread the 3 bundles on her bed. She'd counted twice. Each bundle contained exactly 100 bills. Each bill was a $100 note, $300,000 in cash, just sitting in a condemned casino that she now owned. The logical part of her brain, the part that had balanced checkbooks and paid bills and worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat after Marcus died, screamed that this was wrong. The money had to be reported. It probably belonged to the state, or creditors, or someone. Taking it was theft. But another part of her, the part that had watched her husband waste away because they couldn't afford experimental treatments, the part that had held Lily while her daughter cried about being the only kid in class without new shoes, that part whispered something different. No one knew this money existed. The casino had been closed for 3 years. The previous owners had declared bankruptcy. The city had seized it for unpaid taxes and sold it at auction. Whatever money had been left in that vault, it should have been found and claimed years ago. And she'd seen at least 20 more stacks in that vault. Millions of dollars, just sitting there, forgotten. Sarah pulled out her phone and did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She called Marcus's old work partner, Tommy Chen. Tommy answered on the 3rd ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Sarah, it's 2 in the morning. Everything okay?" "Tommy, I need your help, and I need you to not ask too many questions." There was a pause. "How much trouble are we talking? The kind that could change everything, or ruin everything?" "I honestly can't tell which." Another pause. "Where are you?" "Newark, but the situation is in Atlantic City. I'll be there by sunrise." Tommy Chen had been Marcus's friend since high school and his business partner for 5 years. After Marcus's diagnosis, Tommy had kept the construction business going solo, while still visiting the hospital twice a week. He'd been at the funeral. He'd helped Sarah move to Newark when she could no longer afford their house. He was the closest thing to family she had left. He arrived at 6:47 a.m. with coffee and bagels. Sarah had spent the night researching, reading everything she could find about the Atlantic Paradise Casino's closure, the bankruptcy proceedings, the legal status of abandoned property. What she'd discovered was fascinating. The Atlantic Paradise had closed in 2019 after its parent company, Meridian Gaming Enterprises, had filed for bankruptcy. The bankruptcy had been a mess. Creditors fighting over assets, allegations of financial fraud, investigations by state gaming authorities. In the chaos, the physical casino building had fallen through the cracks. By the time the bankruptcy court got around to dealing with it, the building had been vandalized, stripped of anything valuable, and condemned by the city. The court had transferred ownership to Atlantic City in lieu of back taxes, and the city had immediately put it up for auction. But nowhere in any of the documentation Sarah could find was there any mention of money left in the casino vault. If there had been cash reserves, they should have been part of the bankruptcy estate. The fact that they weren't suggested something very irregular had happened. She showed Tommy the money and told him about the vault. He whistled low. "Sarah, this is insane. I know. If you take that money, it's theft." "Is it? I own the building. Everything in it is legally mine." "Not if it was abandoned during bankruptcy proceedings. The court might still have a claim. Then why didn't they secure the vault? Why did they leave millions of dollars just sitting there? Tommy rubbed his face. Maybe they didn't know it was there. Or maybe… He paused, something crossing his face. What? Marcus and I did some work at the Paradise back in 2018. Right before it closed. Renovation on the high roller suites. We heard rumors. What kind of rumors? That the ownership was dirty. Not just bad at business, actually dirty. Money laundering for some East Coast families. The FBI was supposedly investigating. Sarah felt cold. So this money might be clean gaming reserve, or might be something completely different, something that very dangerous people might want back. They sat in silence for a moment. What are you going to do? Tommy finally asked. Sarah looked at her daughter, still asleep on the beast, pull-out couch, looked at the eviction notice on her counter, looked at the 3 bundles of cash that represented more money than she'd earn in 5 years of working at the diner. I'm going to go back. I'm going to document everything in that vault. Every dollar, every document, every piece of evidence. And then I'm going to figure out who that money really belongs to. And if it's dirty money, if dangerous people come looking, then I'll deal with that when it happens. But Tommy, if that money is just forgotten reserve funds from a bankrupt casino, if it legally belongs to whoever owns the building now, she met his eyes. I own the building. That money could be mine. Could be, or could be the thing that destroys your life. My life is already destroyed, Tommy. Marcus is gone. I'm drowning in debt. I'm 1 car breakdown away from homelessness. This might be my only chance at a life where I don't have to choose between feeding my daughter and filling her prescriptions. Tommy sighed. Okay, but we do this smart. We document everything. We research the ownership trail. We figure out exactly what the legal status of that money is before we make any decisions. Agreed. And Sarah? We don't go back to that vault without backup. If someone was already sniffing around, they'll be back. We need to be prepared. Over the next week, Sarah and Tommy became experts on the Atlantic Paradise Casino. They pulled every public record they could find. They interviewed former employees, tracked down former executives, studied the bankruptcy documents line by line. What they discovered was a trail of deliberate confusion. Meridian Gaming Enterprises had been a shell corporation owned by 3 different holding companies. Those holding companies were themselves owned by a complex web of international entities. Following the money was nearly impossible. But 2 things became clear. First, the FBI investigation Tommy had heard about was real. Meridian Gaming had been suspected of being a front for organized crime money laundering. The investigation had gone cold after the bankruptcy, with no charges filed. Second, someone had been very carefully removing the Atlantic Paradise from official records. Permits were missing. Financial reports were incomplete. Even the bankruptcy documentation was oddly sparse for a business that had generated millions in revenue. It was as if someone wanted the casino to be forgotten. The vault money, assuming it was still there, existed in a legal gray zone. If it had been part of the gaming operation, it should have been reported to the state gaming authority. If it hadn't been reported, that itself was illegal. If it was unreported money from criminal activity, it had no legal owner at all. Which means, Tommy said on day 6 of their research, that technically, you're right. As the property owner, you have the strongest claim to anything found on the premises. But if that money is connected to organized crime, legal ownership won't matter. They'll want it back, and they won't go through the courts. Sarah had thought about that, thought about it every night as she lay awake, listening to Lily's soft breathing. Marcus had always told her she was too brave for her own good, that she'd charge into burning buildings if she thought someone needed help. Maybe he'd been right. Then we need to move fast, Sarah said, before anyone realizes what's there. They went back to the casino on a Wednesday, midday, when the neighborhood was quietest. This time, they came prepared. Tommy brought tools, heavy-duty lights, and his pickup truck. Sarah brought Lily to a friend's apartment. This was no place for a child, no matter how much she'd downplayed the danger during their first visit. The service entrance was now sealed with fresh boards and official city warnings. Someone had been here after them. But Tommy knew buildings. He found a basement access point around the back, an old coal, a chute that led to the original boiler room. It was tight, dirty, and took 20 minutes to navigate, but they made it inside without breaking any visible seals. The casino felt different in daylight, even the dim light filtering through broken windows high above the gaming floor. Less haunted, more sad, like seeing a once beautiful woman ravaged by time and neglect. They moved quickly to the vault corridor. The steel door was exactly as Sarah had left it, slightly ajar. Tommy examined it with his professional eye. Jesus, Sarah. This is a Harrisburg Imperial, probably from the 1982nd. Bank grade. Time lock mechanism built in. So, how was it open when I found it? Someone with the combination opened it. Recently. Look. He pointed to the wheel handle. Fresh oil here. And here. He indicated the hinges. Someone's been maintaining this vault. Sarah felt ice in her stomach. Why would someone maintain a vault in an abandoned building? Only one reason I can think of. They're using to it. They stepped inside together, Tommy's high-powered LED work lights flooding the space with harsh white light. The money was still there. All of it. Sarah counted quickly 23 stacks on the shelves, each labeled with that same handwriting. Gaming Authority Reserve. $100,000. $2.3 million. But there was more. Things Sarah had missed in her panic during the first visit. File boxes on the upper shelves, each carefully labeled with dates spanning from 1985 to 2019. A locked filing cabinet in the corner. And most importantly, a small desk with a single drawer that opened when Tommy pulled it. Inside were ledgers, 5 of them, each one meticulously maintained in the same handwriting as the money labels. Sarah opened the most recent one. The entries ran through early 2019, right up to a week before the casino's closure. But these weren't normal casino accounting records. The left column listed dates and amounts, large amounts, usually 6 or 7 figures. The right column had names, most of which meant nothing to Sarah, but a few jumped out. Tommy, look at this. He leaned over her shoulder, scanning the entries. Holy shit. That's Judge Morrison. And that one, that's Commissioner Bradley. Sarah, these are local politicians. What were they doing with casino money? Not casino money. Tommy flipped back through earlier pages. Look at the deposit amounts. They don't match typical gaming revenue. And these names in the left column. He pulled out his phone, typing quickly. These are businesses, but not local ones. East Coast corporations. Most based in New York and Boston. Sarah understood. Money laundering. Not just laundering. Look at these annotations. He pointed to small notes in the margins. Some entries had initials next to them. Others had cryptic codes. They spent 2 hours documenting everything. Tommy photographed every page of every ledger. Sarah compiled an inventory of the file boxes, making notes of dates and labels. They didn't open the boxes themselves, too risky to disturb evidence. Because that's what this was. Evidence. Evidence of a sophisticated money laundering operation that had run through the Atlantic Paradise Casino for over 30 years. Evidence that implicated dozens of politicians, businessmen, and probably organized crime figures. Evidence that was worth killing for. We need to go, Tommy said suddenly. Now. What? Someone's in the building. I can hear them. Sarah froze, listening. He was right. Footsteps. Distant, but growing closer. And voices. Multiple voices. Men talking in low tones. They moved fast. Sarah stuffing the most recent ledger into her backpack, while Tommy grabbed 2 of the money bundles. They left the vault, pulling the door back to its slightly ajar position. But the footsteps were too close now. They wouldn't make it back to the basement without being seen. Up, Tommy whispered. pointing to a service stairway. Sarah hadn't noticed before. To the roof. They climbed 5 flights in near darkness. The voices below growing louder, more agitated. Someone had noticed the fresh footprints in the dust. Someone knew they weren't alone. The roof access door was locked, but Tommy had bolt cutters. They emerged into bright afternoon sunlight. The Atlantic Ocean visible in the distance. The Atlantic City skyline stretching around them. The Paradise's roof was a nightmare of collapsed sections, standing water, and corroded HVAC equipment. But at the far end, Sarah could see a fire escape that looked more or less intact. They ran, jumping gaps where the roof had caved in, praying the remaining structure would hold their weight. Behind them, the access door burst open. "Stop! You're trespassing on private property." Sarah didn't look back. They reached the fire escape and started down, the old metal groaning under their weight. 2 flights. 3. On the 4th floor, Sarah's foot broke through a rusted step, and she nearly went over the railing. Tommy caught her, his contractor's strength hauling her back. "Keep moving." They reached ground level and ran for Tommy's truck, parked 2 blocks away. Sarah could hear shouting behind them, could hear feet pounding down the fire escape. They made it to the truck. Tommy peeled out, tires squealing. Sarah twisted in her seat to look back. 3 men had emerged from the casino. One was already on a phone. Another was photographing Tommy's license plate. "They got your plate," Sarah gasped. "I know. Tommy, I'm so sorry. Later. Right now we need to figure out what the hell we're going to do with this." He gestured to the backpack between them, now containing $200,000 in cash, and a ledger that could bring down half the political establishment in Atlantic City. They drove north, putting distance between themselves and the casino. Neither spoke for 30 minutes, both processing what had just happened. Finally, Tommy broke the silence. "We have 3 options. We can turn everything over to the FBI. We can try to claim the money legally. Or we can run. Running means they win. Everyone who used that casino to launder money, everyone who took bribes, they all get away with it. But we'd be alive." Sarah looked out the window at the New Jersey landscape rolling past. Thought about Marcus, about how he'd always wanted to do the right thing, even when it was harder. Thought about Lily, about the world she was growing up in. "There's a 4th option," Sarah said quietly. "We do both." "What?" "We turn over the evidence to the FBI. But first, we secure the money, make it disappear in a way that even organized crime can't trace. Use it carefully, slowly, to give us leverage and protection." "Sarah, that's survival." "Tommy, those ledgers show millions of dollars in illegal transactions. Dozens of powerful people are implicated. If we just turn it over to the FBI, we're dead before the investigation even starts. But if we have the money, if they think we're willing to expose them and can't be bought off, they'll negotiate." Tommy was silent for a long moment. "You've really thought about this?" "I've been thinking about nothing else for a week. The money gives us power. The evidence gives us credibility. Together, they might keep us alive long enough to see justice done. And if it doesn't work, then at least Lily inherits enough money to live without struggling every day of her life." They didn't go back to Newark. Instead, Tommy drove to his sister's house in Pennsylvania. She was a lawyer, corporate law. Not criminal, but she had contacts. More importantly, she had a safe place where they could plan without being found. Over the next 48 hours, Tommy's sister, Diana, helped them understand their situation. The money, she explained, was legally complex. As owner of the property, Sarah had a claim to anything found on the premises. But if the money could be proven to be proceeds from illegal activity, the government could seize it under civil forfeiture laws. The ledgers, however, were pure gold. Evidence of an ongoing criminal enterprise, evidence that could corroborate FBI investigations and bring charges against everyone involved. "You need to make a deal," Diana said. Turn over the evidence in exchange for immunity and witness protection. And the money? Sarah asked. The money is your insurance policy. Don't mention it. Don't spend it. Hide it so completely that even if they suspect you have it, they can't prove it. Then if anyone comes after you, whether it's the criminals or the government, you have leverage. You're advising me to hide evidence. I'm advising you to stay alive. There's a difference. Diana connected them with a contact at the FBI's Newark field office, a special agent named Maria Reeves, who specialized in organized crime and financial crimes. They set up a meeting for the following Monday. In the meantime, Sarah and Tommy made arrangements to secure the remaining money from the vault. It was dangerous. They knew people were watching the casino, but they also knew that the chaos of those first few days, the discovery, the chase, the photographs of Tommy's truck, had actually worked in their favor. The criminals involved thought they were petty thieves, maybe scrappers who'd stumbled on something bigger than they understood. They didn't yet know about the ledgers, and that gave Sarah and Tommy a narrow window. Sunday night, 2 a.m. They went back to the casino. This time, they brought help 3 of Tommy's most trusted construction crew, guys who'd worked with Marcus, who knew how to keep their mouths shut. They also brought a plan. The service entrance was now completely sealed. But Tommy had blueprints for the building, obtained from the city planning office. The Paradise had been built in 1984, and like most buildings of that era, it had extensive utility tunnels running beneath it for power, water, and communications. They accessed the tunnel system from a manhole 3 blocks away. With proper lights and tools, they navigated underground to a junction beneath the casino, then up through an old maintenance shaft into the basement boiler room. The entire operation took 4 hours. 4 hours to get into the vault, 4 hours to remove 23 stacks of cash, 5 ledgers, and all the file boxes. 4 hours to completely empty the most incriminating evidence while leaving the vault itself intact. They worked in silence, moving like ghosts through the casino's corpse. Sarah had thought the building felt sad before. Now, knowing what it had been used for, it felt dirty, corrupted. Like the beautiful Art Deco facade had been just a mask for something rotten underneath. The money and documents filled 6 military-style footlockers. They lowered them through the maintenance shaft, then hauled them through the tunnels to the exit point. Tommy's crew loaded them into a waiting van, and, by 6:30 a.m., they were gone, leaving no trace of their presence except disturbed dust that could have been from anyone. Sarah didn't go to the FBI meeting. Too risky. Instead, Tommy and Diana went, bringing only one of the ledgers, the most recent one, covering transactions from 2017 to 2019. Agent Reeves recognized immediately what she was seeing. "Where did you get this?" Her voice was tight, controlled. "I can't say yet," Diana answered. "My client needs certain assurances first. Your client is withholding evidence in a criminal investigation. My client has discovered evidence of a criminal enterprise. There's a difference. She's prepared to share everything, locations, documents, physical evidence, but she needs immunity and protection. Protection from whom? From everyone these ledgers implicate, which, if the other 4 books are as comprehensive as this one, includes organized crime figures, politicians, law enforcement, and businessmen throughout New Jersey and New York." Agent Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Then she made a phone call. Within 2 hours, Sarah was sitting in a secure FBI conference room, surrounded by agents, attorneys, and one very interested assistant U.S. attorney. She told them everything: the auction, the discovery, the vault, the money, the ledgers, the file boxes. What she didn't tell them was where the money was now. "We can protect you," Agent Reeves said. "Full witness protection, if necessary. What about my daughter? My friends? The people who helped me? Everyone gets protection. But you need to give us everything. The physical evidence, the money, all of it." Sarah looked at the assistant U.S. attorney. "If I give you everything, What happens to the money? It becomes evidence. Eventually, it would be liquidated, with portions going to crime victims' funds. And I get nothing, even though I own the property where it was found? Mrs. Mitchell, that money is proceeds from criminal activity. You can't profit from crime. I didn't commit a crime. I bought a building at a legal auction. I found evidence of crimes committed by other people. Why shouldn't I benefit from that discovery? The room was silent. Diana leaned forward. My client is prepared to turn over all the documentary evidence, ledgers, files, records. She'll testify about where she found them and what she observed. She'll help you build your case against everyone involved. But the money itself, that's more complicated. There's nothing complicated about it, the AUSA said firmly. It's evidence. No, Diana countered. The money is property found on land my client legally owns. The documentary evidence shows where the money came from and WHO deposited it. But the money itself is just money. Paper currency with no distinguishing features. Can you prove that those specific bills came from criminal activity? Or could they be legitimate casino reserve funds that were simply never properly documented during the bankruptcy? The AUSA's jaw tightened. That's a very technical argument, but it's a valid one. And it's the argument that will be made in court if you try to seize the money without proper legal foundation. They negotiated for 6 hours. In the end, they reached a compromise. Sarah would turn over all 5 ledgers and all the file boxes. She would provide detailed testimony about where she found them and in what condition. She would identify the vault's location and help FBI forensic teams document the crime scene. In exchange, she would receive immunity from prosecution for any alleged theft or evidence tampering. She would get witness protection if needed. And the money itself would be held in escrow pending resolution of its legal status, which could take years while civil forfeiture proceedings worked through the courts. It wasn't perfect, but it meant Sarah wasn't a criminal, and it meant the evidence would be used to bring down the people who'd turned the Atlantic Paradise into a money and laundering operation. The FBI raided the casino 3 days later. They found the vault exactly as Sarah had described it, empty now of both money and documents, but still containing valuable forensic evidence, fingerprints, DNA, traces of the original contents. They also found something Sarah hadn't known about, a hidden surveillance system, still operational, that had been recording everyone who'd entered the vault for the past 5 years. The footage confirmed everything Sarah had told them, and it showed something more, a parade of familiar faces. Politicians, police officers, businessmen, all making deposits, removing documents, conducting the business of corruption in a supposedly abandoned building. Vincent Castellano appeared in dozens of videos. So did his associates at Boardwalk Development Corporation. Turned out his interest in acquiring the casino hadn't been about development at all. It had been about securing evidence that could destroy him and his associates. The recordings also showed the men who'd chased Sarah and Tommy through the building. They were arrested within days. The indictment started rolling out 6 weeks later. By the time Thanksgiving came around, 18 people had been arrested on charges ranging from money laundering to bribery to racketeering. The investigation was expanding, reaching into New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. Agent Reeves called it the biggest organized crime case in the region in 20 years. The media called it the Atlantic Paradise scandal. Sarah called it justice. But justice came with complications. The attention around the case made anonymity impossible. Sarah's name was in every news report. Her photograph was on the front page of newspapers. People recognized her on the street, some to thank her, others to threaten her. She and Lily moved into a safe house, while the most dangerous of the accused were still awaiting trial. Tommy and his crew got protection too, though Tommy refused to leave New Jersey. I didn't spend my whole life building a business here just to run away, because some criminals don't like getting caught, he told Sarah during one of their weekly check-ins. The money remained in FBI custody, held in a secure evidence facility, while civil forfeiture proceedings crawled through the courts. Diana was confident Sarah would eventually win her claim. The legal arguments were strong, and public sentiment was on her side. A working-class widow who'd stumbled onto evidence of widespread corruption had a good narrative, but even if she won, it would take years. In the meantime, Sarah wasn't rich. The bundles she'd taken on that first visit, $300,000, had been turned over to the FBI as evidence. She was back to living on her savings, rapidly depleting what little she had left. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd found millions of dollars, helped break up a criminal enterprise, and was now more broke than before she'd bought the casino. But she'd also found something else. Something more valuable than money. Purpose. The attention around the case had brought opportunities. A publisher wanted to buy her story. Hollywood producers were calling about film rights. Universities invited her to speak about corporate crime and ethical citizenship. More importantly, the case had energized reform efforts throughout New Jersey. Anti-corruption advocates used the Atlantic Paradise scandal as proof that the system needed fundamental change. New laws were proposed. Task forces were created. People who'd been complacent about corruption for decades suddenly cared. 8 months after buying the casino for $900, Sarah stood in a federal courtroom as the first wave of defendants entered guilty pleas. She watched Judge Morrison, a man who'd sat in judgment of others for 30 years, while taking bribes sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. She watched Vincent Castellano, the smooth-talking developer who'd tried to intimidate her, sentenced to 20 years for racketeering. She watched justice happen. After the sentencing, Agent Reeves pulled her aside. "I wanted to thank you. Officially. What you did took real courage." "I didn't feel very courageous most of the time," Sarah admitted. "Mostly I felt terrified. That's what courage is. Being terrified and doing it anyway." Reeves paused. "We recovered additional evidence from some of the defendants. Financial records that helped us understand the full scope of the money laundering. And Sarah, the amount of money that went through that casino over 30 years? It's staggering. Well, over $50 million. Sarah felt dizzy. 50 million? At least. Which makes the 2.3 million you found look like loose change in comparison. That money was probably just a recent batch, waiting to be moved when the casino closed. And everything fell apart. So it really was criminal proceeds. Almost certainly. But here's the thing, we can't prove it. Not specifically. We can show that criminals deposited money. We can prove the casino was used for laundering. But can we trace those specific bills to specific crimes? No. Which means Diana's legal argument holds up. That money is property found on land you own, and absent direct evidence linking it to crime, you have a legitimate claim. So, I might actually win the civil case. I'd say it's likely, assuming you're willing to wait out the legal process. Sarah thought about that. About waiting. About uncertainty. About building a life in the meantime on hope and possibility, rather than certainty. "I've gotten pretty good at waiting," she said finally, "and at building things from nothing." 2 years later, on a bright October morning, Sarah stood in front of what used to be the Atlantic Paradise Casino. The building was gone, demolished 6 months earlier, after a federal judge ruled that it was irreparably contaminated by criminal activity. The salvage rights had been transferred to the city, the proceeds funding a new community center in an underserved neighborhood. In its place, the lot had been transformed into a public park. The city had commissioned landscape architects to create a green space that honored both the site's history and its promise for the future. A plaque near the entrance told the story. This park stands on the site of the Atlantic Paradise Casino, where in 2021, citizen Sarah Mitchell discovered evidence of widespread corruption. Her courage in coming forward led to the prosecution of 47 individuals and helped restore integrity to our institutions. May all who visit this space remember that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they choose to stand up for what's right. Lily, now 9 years old, read the plaque aloud with pride. "That's you, Mom. You're extraordinary." "No, baby, I'm ordinary. That's the whole point." Sarah pulled her daughter close. Ordinary people can do extraordinary things. The legal battle over the money had finally concluded 3 months earlier. After 2 years of motions, hearings, and appeals, a judge had ruled that the $2.3 million was indeed Sarah's property. The amount was reduced by court costs and fees to $1.8 million. But it was hers. It was enough. Enough to buy a real house, in a good neighborhood, with a yard where Lily could play. Enough to fund Lily's education through college. Enough to never again choose between groceries and medicine. Enough to invest in Tommy's construction business, making them true partners. Enough to establish a foundation providing legal assistance to whistleblowers and those fighting corruption. It wasn't $50 million. It wasn't even the full amount she'd found, but it was more than enough. Because Sarah had learned something during those 2 years of uncertainty. Money was just money. It could solve problems and open doors, but it couldn't give life meaning. That came from other things. It came from watching Lily grow more confident every day, unburdened by the financial stress that had shadowed her early childhood. It came from knowing that Marcus would have been proud of her, that she'd honored his memory by choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. It came from the letters she received every week from people inspired by her story, people who'd found their own courage to speak out against corruption, to challenge powerful interests, to believe that individual actions could make a difference. As they walked through the park, Sarah noticed a familiar figure sitting on one of the new benches. Agent Reeves, now retired from the FBI, waved them over. "I hoped I'd see you here today," Reeves said, standing to greet them. "This is a good space. A good ending." "Is it ending?" Sarah asked. "I keep thinking this is just the beginning." "Smart woman." Reeves pulled an envelope from her bag. "I wanted to give you this personally. It's a thank you, from everyone whose cases were helped by what you found." Inside the envelope was a disrati letter, signed by dozens of people, crime victims whose cases had finally been solved, families who'd gotten closure, prosecutors who'd finally brought down criminals they'd been chasing for years. "You changed a lot of lives," Reeves said softly. "More than you probably realize." After Reeves left, Sarah and Lily walked to the center of the park, where a new playground had been installed. While Lily ran off to try the equipment, Sarah stood still, remembering that day at the auction, when everyone had laughed at her for buying a demolished building, remembering the terror of being chased through the casino, not knowing if she'd make it out alive, remembering the long nights of uncertainty, wondering if she'd done the right thing, if she'd put her daughter in danger for nothing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Grand opening of Chen Mitchell Construction next month. Your name goes on the door whether you like it or not." She smiled. Tommy had rebuilt his business with her investment, and it was thriving. They had more work than they could handle, building and renovating properties throughout New Jersey. This time, though, they did it right, paying fair wages, using sustainable materials, creating spaces that served communities rather than exploiting them. Another text came in, this one from Diana. "Publisher wants to know if you're free for a call tomorrow. They're talking about a book tour next fall. Also, Netflix is now seriously interested in the documentary rights." Sarah typed back, "Tell them I'll think about it." Because the truth was, she didn't need the book deals or movie rights. They'd be nice, the money would help expand her foundation, reach more people, do more good. But they weren't necessary. She'd already gotten what she came for. Safety, security, the ability to give Lily a childhood unmarred by constant financial fear. She'd bought a demolished casino for $900, hoping to salvage enough copper to survive another month. Instead, she'd found evidence that brought down a criminal empire. She'd found courage she didn't know she had. She'd found proof that ordinary people could stand up to corruption and win. She'd found that sometimes The scariest doors are the ones worth opening. "Mom, Mom, come see!" Lily called from the playground, waving excitedly. Sarah jogged over, ready to admire whatever her daughter had discovered, because that was life now. Not worrying about money, not looking over her shoulder, not making impossible choices, just living. Just being a mom who could afford to say yes when her daughter asked for small things, who could plan for the future without dread, who could sleep at night without calculating how many days until eviction. As the sun set over the park that had replaced the casino, Sarah thought about all the people who'd laughed at her that day at the auction. All the people who'd thought she was making a terrible mistake. They'd been right, in a way. Buying that building had been objectively stupid, dangerous, reckless, but it had also been the best decision she'd ever made. Not because of the money, because it had shown her what she was capable of. What ordinary people everywhere were capable of, if they found the courage to look behind sealed doors and confront what they found there. The Atlantic paradise was gone, but what it had revealed about corruption, about courage, about the power of individual action, that legacy would endure. And somewhere, Sarah liked to think Marcus was proud of her, proud that she'd taken the skills he'd taught her and used them for something important, proud that she'd protected their daughter while also protecting truth itself. As darkness fell and the park's new lights flickered on, illuminating paths that hadn't existed a year ago, Sarah gathered her daughter and headed home. Home. A real home. A safe home. A home bought not with dirty money, but with the reward for doing the right thing, even when it was terrifying. They laughed when she'd bought a demolished casino for $900. They'd stopped laughing when she'd used what she found to bring down an empire of corruption. But Sarah wasn't laughing or crying or celebrating. She was just living. Finally, blessedly, living without fear. And that, she'd learned, was the most valuable treasure of all. 3 years after the Atlantic Paradise scandal, Sarah Mitchell stood in the lobby of Chen Mitchell Construction's new headquarters, watching workers install the final piece of their company sign. The building itself was a statement, a renovated 1,920 warehouse in Newark's ironbound district that they'd transformed using sustainable materials and preserving the original architectural details. Marcus had all loved. "Mom, they're here." Lily's voice echoed through the open space. At 12, she'd grown tall and confident, her earlier timidity replaced by the assurance of a child who'd watched her mother take on corruption and win. Sarah turned to see a group of visitors entering 5 women, ranging in age from mid-20s to late 60s, all looking around with a mixture of nervousness and hope. These were the latest applicants to the Mitchell Foundation's legal defense program. Women who'd discovered evidence of wrongdoing in their workplaces and needed support to come forward. "Welcome," Sarah said, moving forward with an extended hand. "I'm Sarah. Thank you for being brave enough to reach out." The oldest woman, whose application said her name was Patricia, gripped Sarah's hand tightly. "I read about what you did, what you went through. I kept thinking, if she could do it, maybe I can too." Sarah led them to the conference room, where Diana waited, now the Foundation's full-time legal director. Over the past 3 years, they'd helped 43 whistleblowers navigate the treacherous waters of exposing corruption. Some cases made headlines, others were resolved quietly, but every single person who came to them got competent legal representation and financial support to sustain them through the investigation process. It turned out that the $1.8 million Sarah had won wasn't just enough for her family. It was seed money for something much larger. After the story broke, donations had poured in from people inspired by her courage. Small amounts, mostly $20 here, $50 there, but they added up. Corporate ethics professors used her case in their classes. Journalism schools taught it as an example of the importance of protecting sources and whistleblowers. A tech billionaire who'd made his fortune exposing fraud in Silicon Valley had written a check for $2 million with a simple note: "Keep fighting." The foundation now had an endowment of over $8 million. As Diana began explaining the legal process to the new applicants, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Tommy. "You need to see this. Conference room B. Now." Sarah excused herself and walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floors. She still sometimes couldn't believe this was her life, running a successful construction company and a foundation, living in a beautiful home in Montclair, sending Lily to a private school where her daughter thrived. Tommy was waiting in the smaller conference room with Agent Reeves, who, despite being retired, still kept in touch regularly. But there was someone else there too, a young man in his early 20s with nervous eyes and a laptop bag clutched in his hands. "Sarah, this is Marcus Chen," Tommy said, and Sarah's breath caught. "No relation," he added quickly, "but he reached out to us through the foundation website. I think you need to hear what he has to say." The young man stood awkwardly. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm a data analyst at Castellano Properties." Sarah felt ice in her veins. Vincent Castellano was in federal prison, but his company had been taken over by his son, Vincent Jr., who'd claimed to know nothing about his father's criminal activities. "I've been working there for 8 months, Marcus continued, "and I found something. In the archived files from before the elder Castellano went to prison. I think there's another vault." The room went silent. "Explain," Agent Reeves said, leaning forward. Marcus opened his laptop, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled up spreadsheets and scanned documents. "I was digitizing old property records when I noticed a pattern. Between 1985 and 2019, Castellano Properties acquired 17 different commercial buildings in Atlantic City, Newark, and Trenton. Most were later sold or demolished, but the acquisition prices were all extremely low, and the documentation is sparse." "Like the Atlantic Paradise," Sarah said quietly. "Exactly. And look at this." He brought up a map showing the locations of all 17 properties. They form a network. Each building is within a 15-minute drive of at least 2 others, and each one had basement. Renovations completed by the same contractor within 6 months of acquisition. Tommy whistled. "They built a distribution network, multiple storage points for their operation." "That's what I thought," Marcus said. "And when I looked at the records for what happened to these buildings after Castellano's arrest, most were seized by the government or sold to cover legal costs. But 3 weren't. 3 buildings were transferred to shell corporations 6 months before the Atlantic Paradise scandal broke. Like someone knew what was coming and moved assets to protect them." Agent Reeves was already on her phone. "I'm calling this in. If there are 3 more vaults, there could be more evidence," Sarah finished. "More names, more connections." Marcus pulled out a flash drive. "I copied everything I could find before I left. Property deeds, renovation contracts, financial records. I know what I'm risking by coming forward. I've seen what happened to other people who crossed the Castellanos. But I also know what you did, Mrs. Mitchell. And I figured if you could take on the whole operation, I could at least bring you what I found." Sarah looked at this young man, who'd chosen courage over comfort, who'd risked his career and possibly his safety, because he believed in doing the right thing. She saw herself 3 years ago, terrified but determined, not knowing if she'd survive but knowing she had to try. "You did the right thing," she told him, "and we're going to make sure you're protected while we figure out what to do with this information." Over the next week, Agent Reeves brought in current FBI investigators. Marcus's data was verified and cross-referenced with existing case files. The 3 buildings he'd identified, a former electronics warehouse in Newark, an abandoned restaurant in Trenton, and a closed medical office building in Atlantic City, all showed the same patterns as the Paradise. The FBI obtained warrants and raided all 3 locations. Simultaneously, they found vaults in each one. 2 were empty, their contents apparently removed after Castellano's arrest. But the third, in the medical office building, contained something extraordinary: digital storage drives with encrypted files dating back 15 years. Years of electronic records that complemented the paper ledgers Sarah had found, creating a complete picture of the money laundering operation. But there was more. The drives also contained evidence of a second criminal enterprise that had been running parallel to the money laundering medical fraud: fake billing records, phantom patients, insurance scams that had defrauded Medicare and private insurance companies of over $30 million. The investigation exploded outward again, touching new people, new institutions, new webs of corruption. Sarah watched it unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. Part of her had hoped that after the Atlantic paradise, she could just live quietly, run her businesses, raise her daughter. But another part, the part that Marcus had awakened in her when he'd taught her to see structural problems rather than just surface issues, knew that corruption was never just one building, one scheme, one group of criminals. It was systemic, and fighting it would be a lifetime's work. "You don't have to be involved in this one," Diana told her during a foundation meeting. "You've done your part, more than your part. Let the FBI handle it." But Sarah found herself unable to step back, because Marcus Chen, the young data analyst, reminded her so much of herself. He'd found evidence accidentally while doing routine work. He'd faced the same choice: she had turn away and pretend ignorance, or step forward and risk everything. He'd chosen to step forward, and she owed it to him, to everyone like him, to see it through. The second wave of indictments came 14 months after Marcus's initial revelation. 18 more people were arrested, including Vincent Castellano Jr., who turned out to have been very aware of his father's criminal activities and had actively worked to conceal them. The medical fraud charges were particularly significant because they brought in federal health agencies, adding layers of investigation and accountability that the original money laundering case hadn't triggered. Sarah testified again, this time not as the primary witness, but as an expert on recognizing and documenting evidence of organized crime. The prosecution team valued her insight. She understood how these operations worked from the inside in a way that career law enforcement didn't. After one particularly long day of testimony, Sarah returned to her car in the courthouse parking garage to find someone waiting. An elderly woman, impeccably dressed, with the bearing of someone who'd been powerful once. "Mrs. Mitchell," the woman said. "I'm Eleanor Castellano, Vincent's mother." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her phone, ready to call security. But something in the woman's posture stopped her. This wasn't a threat. This was something else. "I know you have no reason to speak with me," Eleanor continued. "I know my family has brought you nothing but trouble. But I wanted to tell you something before I die. I'm 87 years old, Mrs. Mitchell. I won't live to see my son get out of prison, or my grandson for that matter. And I'm glad." Sarah waited, saying nothing. "My husband built that empire you destroyed, started it in the 1,960 seconds, with gambling debts and extortion, grew it into something that touched every corner of this state. He died thinking he was a success, thinking he'd built something that would last generations." Eleanor's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "I watched him corrupt my son, watched my son corrupt my grandson, watched 3 generations of Castellano men choose power over decency, money over morality. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know that what you did, finding that evidence, coming forward, refusing to be intimidated. You didn't just take down a criminal operation. You broke a cycle. My great-grandchildren won't grow up learning that crime is the family business. They'll grow up knowing their grandfather and great-grandfather went to prison for breaking the law. And maybe, just maybe, that will make them choose differently." Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is a bank check for $500,000, made out to the Mitchell Foundation. It's clean money, my inheritance from my own family, never touched by my husband's business. I want it used to help people like you, people who find corruption and have the courage to expose it." Sarah stared at the check. "I can't take this." "Yes, you can. Because I can't take it with me. And I'll be damned if it goes to lawyers fighting to reduce my family's prison sentences. Take it. Use it. Help more people choose courage over complicity." Before Sarah could respond, Eleanor walked away, moving slowly but with dignity, leaving Sarah standing in the parking garage with a check that represented a different kind of ending, one where even the families of criminals could choose redemption. Sarah deposited the check the next day. The foundation's board voted unanimously to accept it, creating a new program specifically for family members of criminals who wanted to break free from cycles of corruption. They named it the Eleanor Castellano Second Chances Program, ensuring that the woman who'd spent her life surrounded by crime would be remembered for the good she'd tried to do at the end. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. The construction business thrived. They'd landed a major contract, renovating 3 public schools in Newark, work that Marcus would have been proud of. The foundation continued helping whistleblowers, with Marcus Chen, the data analyst, joining their team after the trial concluded. Lily grew into a teenager who talked about becoming a lawyer like Diana, or maybe an investigative journalist, or possibly an FBI agent. She'd grown up watching her mother fight corruption, and it had shaped her sense of what was possible, what was right, what was worth fighting for. On the 5th anniversary of the day Sarah had bought the Atlantic Paradise Casino for $900, the foundation held a gala fundraiser. Over 300 people attended, whistleblowers they'd helped, FBI agents who'd worked the cases, journalists who'd covered the story, and dozens of ordinary citizens who'd been inspired to speak up about corruption in their own communities. Agent Reeves gave a speech about how Sarah's courage had created ripple effects throughout law enforcement, changing how they thought about protecting and supporting whistleblowers. A senator who'd sponsored new whistleblower protection legislation credited Sarah's case with providing the political will to pass the reforms. But the moment that stuck with Sarah came at the end of the night, when a young woman approached her nervously. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Amanda Rodriguez. I work for a pharmaceutical company, and I found evidence that they're falsifying drug trial data. I've been terrified to come forward, but then I heard about you and what you did, and I thought, maybe I can do it too. Maybe ordinary people really can fight corruption and win." Sarah took Amanda's hands in hers. "You absolutely can. And you won't be doing it alone. That's what we learned. None of us can do this alone. But together, supporting each other, protecting each other, we can change the world." As Sarah drove home that night, Lily asleep in the passenger seat, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From desperate widow making an insane gamble on a condemned building, to leader of a movement that was changing how society dealt with corruption. She thought about Marcus, about how proud he'd be, about how the skills he'd taught her, seeing structural problems, thinking systematically, having the courage to take on hard projects, had translated into something neither of them could have imagined. She thought about the $2.3 million she'd found in that vault, and how it had seemed like the answer to all her problems. In a way it had been, but not because of the money itself, because of what finding it had forced her to become. Courage wasn't something you had, or didn't have. It was something you chose, moment by moment, decision by decision. And every time you chose it, you made it a little easier for the next person to choose it too. That was the real treasure she'd found in the Atlantic Paradise Casino. Not money, but purpose. Not wealth, but the knowledge that one person, acting with integrity, could genuinely change the world. She pulled into her driveway, looking at the home that courage had built. Tomorrow, she'd go back to the foundation, back to helping the next person who'd found evidence of corruption and needed support to come forward. Back to the work that would never truly be finished, but was always worth doing. Sarah carried her sleeping daughter inside, tucked her into bed, and stood for a moment looking at family photos on the wall. Marcus, in his prime, smiling at the camera with that knowing look that said he could see the whole structural problem in any building. Lily as a baby, as a toddler, growing year by year, and recent photos, Lily at the foundation office, Lily at the construction site, Lily growing up watching her mother choose courage every single day. That was the legacy worth building. Not just financial security, though that mattered. Not just bringing criminals to justice, though that was important, but showing the next generation that ordinary people had extraordinary power when they chose to use it. Sarah turned off the lights and went to bed, knowing that somewhere right now, someone was discovering evidence of corruption. Someone was facing the same choice she'd faced: turn away or step forward. And because she'd stepped forward, because she'd shown it was possible to fight and win, maybe that next person would choose courage too. The Atlantic Paradise Casino was long gone, demolished and transformed into a park. But what it had started, a movement of ordinary people refusing to accept corruption as inevitable, that was just beginning. And Sarah Mitchell, who'd once been mocked for buying a condemned building for $900, was helping lead the way. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.